All right. Good morning, PT on Ice crowd. It is Monday morning, February 25th. My name is Mike Eisenhardt. I am the lead faculty for the APHPT set of courses and the CERT course, both the intro and the CERT course. And it is Monday. It is Monday. So it is time to get busy with a little Monday with Pop. Good morning, Sean. Good to see you. Take my final sip of coffee, as I've been trying to do now, third week in a row, back to the tradition of the morning Joe with the crew. All right, looks like Mark is on. Good morning, Mark. See some people rolling in, so that's good. That's a good sign. I always love to see a little live. I'm going to try to go back even one step further today for those who are on live. And get a little banter back and forth. So anybody who's got something to throw in there, please feel free to do so. Good morning, Mike and crew, says Mark. So that's good to see. All right, let me start the clock. Get rolling here. So 15 minutes. We're talking about Tinkerers Unite. And I probably could have named this Tinkerers Delight. I've been hanging out now with Aaron Perez for a few months, and rapping has just become part of our culture now. So that's kind of a cool thing, and of course, that makes me think of the original. So Tinkerers Delight maybe is what we should have called it. But the idea of this morning is really to give a little bit of a hat tip to, I think, something that's happening, like a little phenomenon that I'm seeing, which is awesome. Guys like me get pretty excited about it. And also hopefully bring some attention to it so that people who also see that phenomenon can kind of jump on board and get going. So one of the things that we talk a lot about in these courses is this idea of the N of 1 experiment, right? You have to try this stuff. You have to experience it. You have to sometimes do it on yourself is by far the best thing to do. And in the intro course and kind of as we move into some of the other courses, that's a common thread, this idea of catch what you think you're seeing, see a phenomenon, and then try it and experience it and see what's going on there. So that idea, that concept of kind of like tinkering and trying things and learning from doing is a really, really important central theme when it comes to changing the complex, which in many ways this idea of health-facing practice really is. It's about the idea that health is kind of a complex, emergent phenomenon. It's not something that you can predict 100%. You can predict a lot of it. You know the upstream factors. You sort of know what plays into it, but you can't predict it in whole. You can't predict it in full. And so the best way to kind of learn it is to try, is to do, to be a doer, to actually get your hands dirty, make some mistakes, and kind of move forward and learn from that. Now, there's a lot there, and I guess what I wanted to do today was sort of, talk about that a little bit. Some of this is prompted because I saw some banter going back and forth, which was cool to see, actually. I was pumped to see it. Some banter going back and forth with the idea of, wait a minute, maybe there's a common pathway. Which is super exciting for guys like me, right? So some of us have been banging on this drum of like common pathway for a very long time, that when you look at a phenomenon, which is, whether it be musculoskeletal disorders and pain, whether you look at it be cancers of some types, whether you look at heart disease, diabetes, metabolic disorders, depression, anxiety, a lot of these things seem to have sort of a common root, a common pathway. When you get it all the way down, there's something there. In the courses, as Alan, who I see has hopped on, teed up, I once called it lack of healthy behavior disease, and that seemed to stick, and now we hear people point to that. But that idea of a common root, a commonality on a lot of outputs is really important for us to kind of see as a phenomenon, right? We don't understand it in full, and that's completely okay. We don't understand it in full, but we see it, we understand it. It's kind of a naturally occurring phenomenon that if you're paying attention, you notice. And I think that's a really important thing. And this past weekend and this past week, we saw some of that, some conversation happening there, and it was awesome. And the reason why it's awesome is because I think it gets us closer to recognizing that maybe, and I say this humbly, I say this in a way that I hope doesn't infuriate people too much, but maybe we've overshot our reliance on evidence and research. For years, like I was kind of there when the evidence-based practice thing switched over. Anybody who's been in practice for 15 years or more has kind of seen this thing where it's like, all right, evidence is now going to become critical. And believe me, if you know me at all, like I'm a total geek with this stuff. Like I love reading research and studies and going and looking at it. But what we've done is we've almost crippled ourselves because we've overshot it so far that now we can't do anything if it's not absolutely locked down in the evidence, right? Like we will say, well, I can't do, like I'm stopped, I'm dead, because that's bad practice if I can't somehow prove it beyond the shadow of a doubt with science. I think that's an absolute overshot. It's a bastardization of what evidence-based practice is supposed to be. Instead of looking at it and saying, look, this is complex, this is something we can't explain always, this is something that we can't, prove every detail out, but we see the phenomenon, and so let's take a very small baby step, a little N of 1, a little tiny thing that has very low downside. It's not going to harm anybody, right? So you've heard me banter and scream about the idea of do no harm, which often means do something. Like you can't just stand by and allow harm to happen, or else you are doing harm. Well, finding things that are little, like little itty bitty bets that have a big upside if you get it right, and a very small downside if you don't, those are fantastic to do. Those are, in fact, we should be doing. To me, that's called tinkering. Right now, I like that word. I especially like it because I'm in the midst of rereading Anti-Fragile again, or actually listening to it on audiobook. I can't tell you how many times I've read this book and I learn something new every time. It's a phenomenal read, hard read, a deep read. He's a really a cerebral author. But the idea of it is spot on when it comes to healthcare. And that is also a word that my dad used to use growing up, and that's kind of like the root of the whole mad science thing. So anybody who knows me, the whole mad science-y thing, like in many ways that's what that is that we sort of grew up with this idea that trying things and tinkering and making mistakes was not only a normal part of learning, like that's how you learn, right? We watch others, there's a social learning piece, and we see what mistakes they make, and hopefully we can learn from the mistakes of others, but that we're all sort of working together as a whole to advance whatever it is we're trying to advance, to get closer to the top of the mountain. And so this concept of we can make some mistakes, we can try some things, even in the absence of perfectly locked down research, is absolutely critical to this idea of tinkering, and tinkering will get us there faster. That's my opinion, right? That's something that, I've just seen it time and time again, that making mistakes and not fearing those mistakes, not being, sort of locked into inaction, is actually a really, really big part of advancing forward. Now, of course, people like Carol Dweck call that the growth mindset, right? Of like, don't be so afraid of making mistakes. Like, it's not a reflection on you that you're not perfect. It's a reflection in the positive that you're willing to try, that you're willing to get yourself out there. So that's kind of, step number one. And I feel like when I see conversation happening that sort of says, hey, wait a minute, maybe, right? So people who are usually very much locked into evidence-based and evidence-based literature and also their, practice and all this stuff. But when they start saying, well, hold on, maybe there's this, or what about, that? Like they start questioning, that to me is a awesome recognition that maybe we're letting our grip loosen just a little bit. And that if we're willing to do that, maybe the pendulum has swung so far that maybe it can come back toward the center a little bit, and that then we'll advance much, much faster. The second thing is that it's the good of the whole, right? So the first principle of kind of overcoming this is make some bets on things that have a small downside and a big upside. Right, so let me give you an example. We talked about it last night in the cohort, in the live CERT cohort. I love it, Mark. Signs of hope, no doubt. So we talked about it yesterday, right? So there is some literature out there, and you can find it. It's a great study. I think next time on Vice, on Virtual ICE, I'm going to go over this because I think it's a powerful one. But it's a pretty good little thing out of BMJ, and it talks about how to get in the physician practice the conversation on physical activity, right? Like how to actually do it. And why that's important. And one of the things that really stuck out at me was physical activity is a huge upside, small downside bet, right? Like bringing up the conversation of physical activity in your client interactions. And of course, they're directing this at physicians, but there's no difference between that and PTs. I mean, PTs can have the same exact conversation, or chiros, or anybody else who has an office interaction. And the reason why it's such a nice bet is because the number needed to treat analysis, was kind of like somewhere around like 12. Like basically, like for every 12 conversations, you're going to get a one that's actually going to go in the right direction. Whereas when they compared that to other really important things, like smoking cessation in physicians' offices, it was more like 150. So they need to have 150 conversations about stop smoking before they get one. Whereas in physical activity, it was like a dozen. Okay, that was kind of how that to me is a perfect example of a massive upside, like low downside risk. Like, what's the risk of talking to someone about physical activity? Now, yeah, we know there are words that can harm, and we know that there are ways to go after this, and there's a right way to do things. And I'm not saying you should beat over the head people about physical activity and shame them into doing exercise, but simply asking the question and engaging in the conversation and sort of knowing this principle. Like, look, the phenomenon is very clear. People who move enough and move through variable ranges of motion generally are healthier. People who maintain their strength into late age are generally healthier. Like that's about as simple as you can get. Like, that's a phenomenon. And we don't have to keep studying it. It's there. It's good enough. Physical activity, good. Okay, that heuristic rule of thumb. Physical activity, good. We like it. More is generally better to a point. Okay, fine. You can definitely overdo it if your body's not ready for it. There's some nuance there. Fine. Okay. There's a lot of upside for a lot of reasons, and we don't understand all of them. Okay, good. Great. Good enough. That's enough for us to move on. And so, to me, then the challenge becomes, how do you work that into practice? People want practical stuff. They want to, that's kind of the number one feedback we hear, through the ICE courses and through Vice is, I need something practical on this health promotion stuff. Here's about as practical as it gets. Talk about it. Talk about it to everyone you know. Every single person you have a conversation with, regardless of their lot in life or status in an organization, talk to them excitedly about the power of physical activity. Okay, about how unbelievably amazing this is, and that how it performs as well or outperforms almost every drug on the market. Okay, just have that conversation and you are beginning down the road of population health, and anyone can do it. So the next time you start talking about whatever, pick any conversation that you're just basically, bantering with a client and wasting some time so that it's not awkward silence. Think about, how could I have worked in the conversation of how exciting physical activity is. Now, there are others. Of course, we talk about all of the 5 elements, but I don't want to, challenge you too much too soon. Okay, the next part of this, and I'm sort of looking at my clock. I've only got about 3 minutes. So the next part of this is knowing full well that there is a difference between a list of ingredients and a recipe. Okay? You don't become a good chef. I proved this last week for the proactivity crowd. You don't become a good chef by simply having a recipe. Okay? And you definitely don't get it by a list of ingredients. If you want to ever try this on your own, roll over and look at an ingredients list on the back of any single package, go out and buy those ingredients and throw them together and see if what comes out of it is whatever you bought. Okay, I'm guessing you will not recreate the Dorito by simply looking and finding those ingredients, right? You just won't do it. There's a system to make it happen. Well, that system didn't happen overnight. They didn't just dream it up and be like, hey, bring in a bunch of ingredients, let's throw them all together. That is your development. That is the process of getting good. That is trial and error and making upside bets. Okay, that's really important. And even a recipe won't turn you into a great chef. It might turn you into a great, station cook. Maybe you can get really good at cooking whatever, one thing. But after that, eventually you climb that ladder, you get better and better and better at it by developing and trialing and error. And then eventually you become the head of the kitchen, right? So if you like watching cooking shows at all, and I really don't, but I've seen enough of them to sort of see this theme, that the head chef is much more, the lead of the orchestra, right? They're making sure all of the parts work together. That's what we're all aspiring to in our practice. Okay, we will not do everything on our own, and the minute we can't let go of that is the minute we are destined to be a technician forever. That is not the same as someone who is trying to rein in and manage and move the herd and control a complex system. Complexity, you can't predict it all. Health is a complex, emergent phenomenon. You need to somehow sort of herd it in the right direction. The only way you're going to do that is with people and with a team, okay? And that team is going to have their roles, and they're going to get good at what they do, and you're going to get good at what you do, and the leader of that is going to hopefully, create a symphony. Is going to make sure that all the parts are working together well. That's the interdependence. Okay, so in my last final minute, I just want to kind of wrap it up with this thought and this idea. And maybe this is the challenge. As you enter the week, regardless of what setting you're in, Whether you're talking to clients, whether you are treating clients, whether you have your hands on them, whether you're coaching them, whether you are working with business leaders, whether you're working with community leaders, go back to the work of practice with pride, right? Like that is like the most important thing. Be proud of the fact that you are figuring it out as we go, right? Like keep a tally sheet somewhere. Maybe it's in your brain, maybe it's literally written down in a notebook of what was the reaction when I tried that, right? So we're seeing a lot of really good ideas on how to do it, okay? But what was the reaction when you tried it? You know, when you got your person who hasn't exercised in the clinic and came in with some kind of, pain syndrome, when you got their heart rate up to 65 or 75% of their heart rate maximum, what was the reaction? Okay? And did you make a point to draw that out? Did you say, hey, I loved, Betty, how you were smiling right there. Like you were working hard. You should be totally proud of yourself. Okay? Did you pull that out? And did you write it down? So that the next time you go back and say, I used that exact phrase and I got that response. Let me see if it's the phrase, oh, there's the bell, okay, or just simply the thing, the task. That's where we get to the next level, right? So if we can again, just to review, if we can abandon some of our over-reliance on everything has to be proven or else we can't do it, right? Like we're bad for doing things experimentally, but bet on things that have tremendous upside risk. Right? Like, hey, if this goes right, I'm going to crush it. If it goes wrong, not the end of the world, whatever. I might look silly for a second. Fine. Okay, make bets on those, and lots of them, right? We call that planting seeds. Like plants lots of little seeds and see what begins to take. That's a good thing. Okay. Third, it's about practice. It's not about the recipe. It's about the doing. Like you could have the best recipe in the world and still suck at making a cake. Okay? But the bottom line is that you can get there with the recipe if you begin to try it. That's giving yourself permission to do so. And then finally, get back to the work of practice. Like perfect practice makes perfect. That idea, right? Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes automatic. Okay, that's true. So think about what your practices are and start dialing into perfect practice. That's trial and error. All right, I've taken too much time already today. Hopefully that makes some sense. It's exciting for me. It's exciting for me that the tinkerers we're almost going to have our day, right? Like if you have a little bit of that mad science-y feel in your heart somewhere, like you like the excitement of trying things and seeing, how it works and understanding. Like the tinkerers are on the rise, and we're getting back together. So I'm sounding the horn today. Tinkerers, come out, unite, delight, have fun, because it's only Monday. And at the end of the day, we've got a whole lot more in front of us to do than we have done behind us. And so we have to keep moving forward in a strong way. It's only Monday. We got a whole week. Make it count.